sharing his thoughts with us.
I just want to make one point about Ignacio. It's important to note that he literally took the book and implemented it without us at all. So you can basically take the book and run the process without. So let me introduce Peter. Peter is, of course, the founder and CEO of the XPrize Foundation, has transformed the space industry. He's the founder and chairman of Singularity University, a very dear friend. He was a huge collaborator and in fact was supposed to be the co-author for EXO and helped in some of the foundational concepts like the 10X idea. For somebody who's helped 10X my life and is 10Xing the world, Peter looks like he's in his Tesla, which is driving him somewhere. So Peter, welcome, and a few words to say.
Thank you, buddy. First of all, can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Fantastic, great. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Yeah, it's a crazy day for me. I just got back from Mexico, then I'm off to China tonight, and always a pleasure to support Salim and my dear friends in the Exponential Organizations family. So what can I say? At the end of the day, I remember in the earliest days when Salim was formulating exponential organizations as a concept. Salim, I remember walking on the beaches here in Santa Monica, and you were sort of speaking about what it was, and I was like, dude, you hit it. That's perfect, and it's true, right? We're entering a period of time where the rate of change is accelerating. I like to say the only constant is change, and the rate of change is accelerating, and it's accelerating for a multitude of reasons, right? We all know of Ray Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns and the exponential increase of computational power in Moore's law. But on top of that, we also have the fact that everything is demonetizing. So the cost of computational power, cost of memory, the cost of genome sequencing, all these things are plummeting at the same time that the amount of capital is more available than any time ever in human history. We hit all-time highs last year in seed capital, venture capital, initial coin offerings, sovereign wealth fund investments. And because of the huge amount of capital and the demonetization and the fact that we're now connecting, you know, going from 3.8 billion people connected in 2017 to 8 billion people connected, all these things are accelerating the number of people innovating and trying new companies. And so at the end of the day, the challenge is that if you run a company or an organization the way it's always been run, you will perish. I have no question. I'm in front of the boards and leadership teams of the Fortune 200, Fortune 500 companies around the world, through SU, through my speaking, through XPrize, and you know, my message to them is, listen, it's the most exciting time it's ever been to be alive. We're going to create more wealth in the next 10 years than we have in the entire past century. And every single company industry is going to be disrupted this decade. I mean, it's as simple as that. And there's this emotional roller coaster ride that everyone is on, like, oh my God, it's amazing. Oh my God, I'm screwed. And the fact of the matter is that unless you're actively figuring out how to reinvent your business and become an exponential organization, I think the book and this book and the books all together have hit it on the head. You can't compete. You know, we're going to a world where everything is being digitized, dematerialized, demonetized, democratized, and if you are in a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset, it's not going to work. So I'm clear that a lot of the learnings and what the Exponential Organizations team has done through its methodologies and workshops are step one to disrupt an organization that is very traditional. I mean, the challenge that most organizations have today is they're competing against what I call a founder-led, data-driven experimentalist organization. those three things, right? Where the founder, whether it's Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, you know, Salim, myself, whoever it might be, is driven by their massively transformative purpose, their MTP. I love that term that Salim coined, that I teach and share around the world, because doing anything big and bold in the world is hard, and unless it's being driven by an inner emotional energy, you're going to give up before you complete it, you know. And that emotional energy, either of love or hate or passion or desire, whatever that emotional energy is going to keep you going as a company or as an individual. So a founder-led company typically has got that MTP, that passion, and then they're data-driven, meaning they're not driven by opinion. They're driven by, let's do the experiments, let's look at the data, and then figure out what to do. So, you know, these are the world we're living in. And if you're trying to compete against a data-driven experimentalist organization, and you're not that, you're going to find it very, very hard. And so, you know, when I think about how does a company, and again, when I'm on the stage, I was just in Mexico last week, spending the day with Carlos Slim and his family, his kids, his grandkids, companies. And the number one question being asked there, when I was in Brazil meeting with the wealthiest Brazilian companies, it's always the same. We're a traditional company. We're, you know, 20 years old, 50 years old, 100 years old. How do we become an exponential organization? How do we change ourselves? And the reality is that most do not. It's very hard for an organization to change itself, to transform itself. And it only happens from my mind, from the top down, and it only happens in most cases during extremis, when the company is facing near-death experiences. And so the importance of creating processes that allow you to, from the top, but also in the organization, begin to imagine how you reinvent yourself, understanding what are you measuring, right? Without a target, you'll miss it every time. What data are you collecting? How do you create an experimentalist organization? How do you allow for failure? You know, Jeff Bezos very famously said, you know, Amazon's success is a function of the number of experiments we do per year, per month, per week, per day. And if we're going to be running a lot of experiments, we're going to fail a lot. We need to have a tolerance for failure. And so how do you create an organization that is running experiments and has a tolerance for failure? Some of the numbers are staggering for most CEOs, that companies like Google, like Amazon, like Tesla, you know, name your favorite exponential organization, are running not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of experiments per year. And they aren't interested in a person's opinion, they're interested in the data. And so again, it's data-driven experimentalist organizations that are going to rule the world. So one of the other things I think that Salim and I talk about, and we talk about in this book, and we talk about throughout EXO, is, you know, in the next 20 years, everything is going to change. How we raise our kids, how we govern our nations, concerns around technological unemployment, concerns around privacy. And these are not, you know, these are big challenges that governments are having and large institutions are having. And it's not something that's going to be facing your kids or grandkids. It's facing us right now. And so how do we think about that? How do we dive down at an organization, at a city, at a country level, to think about these challenges and how do we reinvent ourselves in this exponentially accelerating time. So let me pause and address maybe a statement or question, Salim, that you might want to ask. But I mean, there's an amazing amount of energy, and I think the reason that Singularity University came into existence and why you wrote your book and why my Abundance 360 community and XPrize communities all exist is because we feel palpably that the world is accelerating and the same old way of doing business isn't going to be good enough anymore. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, Peter, that's an awesome summary of kind of the state of the world. And it's important to mention that these dozen technologies, each of them is kind of building on their own, but where they intersect, that adds a whole other multiplier to the equation, right? And that's staggering. I talk about 20 Gutenberg moments hitting us at the same time. The big challenge is how do you wake people up and then get them? And I think the work that you're doing is how do you wake people up and say, this is a new world. And then what we're trying to do is create a methodology they can follow to actually go do the transformation that's required. So hugely appreciate you joining us. And if you haven't read Abundance in Bold, please go do that because that's part of the complementary aspect of the nature of this work. Peter, anything last minute you want to say before we sign off?
No, I think you're right. I mean, well, I know you're right. I mean, the convergence of technologies. In fact, my next book that I'm in the middle of writing right now is called Convergence. Abundance, Bold, and Convergence. ABCs, if you would. Convergence is all about the fact that, yeah, I know. Convergence is all about the idea that you can be an expert in AI really hard. You could be an expert in 3D printing or an expert in IoT and know what's going on, but it's the convergence of 2, 3, or 4 of those coming together that creating new business models that are changing the game. And again, I think any company that isn't properly agitated, scared, trying to wake itself up is a company that is not going to be around much longer. I looked at the numbers, and what I talk about, use the example of retail that in the United States in 2006. You look at all the retail companies out there and you see Amazon down at the very bottom. And in 2016, a decade later, all these retail companies have dropped down 90%, minus 70%, minus 80%. And there is Amazon plus 3,000%. Things can change very rapidly in a decade, and things are going to change faster and faster and faster. So the good news is it's creating a world of abundance where I truly believe we're going to meet the needs of every man, woman, and child. The bad things is it's causing disruption and change at a rate that is uncomfortable for humans. And as Salim, as you and I talk about all the time, most of the large institutions out there, governments, religious institutions, the largest corporations, are all about stability, right? They want to stabilize society. They don't want change to occur. And we as humans don't like change, but all these things are causing tremendous change. And how do you, the phrase I like to use is, how do you surf on top of the tsunami instead of being crushed by it? So anyway, I commend this book. I commend the original book, Exponential Organizations, and all the work that you, Salim, and the team is doing. And I love you, brother. Be well.
Likewise. Peter, thanks for joining. Hope your Tesla gets to you to where you're trying to get.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, pal.
All right. I'm going to make 2 quick comments on Peter's in his car, and to give you a sense of it, this pace of change. I actually drove a Tesla 2 years ago from Toronto to Miami, and at the time the car drove itself about 35% of the time. So I'd get on the highway, I'd hit the button, and the car drove itself. Sometimes it lost its way in construction or going over a hump, etc. 6 months ago, I drove it back. Okay, and what was incredible was On the way up, it drove itself 35% of the time. On the way back, same car, same sensors, but now it's driving itself 80% of the time. And there you see almost an exact doubling in 18 months. No change in hardware, just better software, better analytics, better sensors, that many more cars have gone down the street. And so profound kind of insight there, the real experience of that. It was like having a first-class train ticket across the country, and the cost was free. And this is where Peter talks about demonetization and abundance, etc. And I want to just finish on this point, and I'll pass it back to Yaroslav. All of our businesses for several thousand years have essentially been set up. If you didn't have scarcity, you didn't have a business, basically. But what's happening today is these new EXOs, more and more, are finding business models around abundance, okay? Airbnb is tapping into an abundance of extra bedrooms lying around. Uber, an abundance of cars. And what we're finding is a new breed of organization that's tapping into and finding business models around abundance. And therefore, if you're not doing that, you've got a big problem. And so that's the second point. So let me pause there, pass it back. Peter, thank you for your time. Inspirational as always. And